Hi, my name is Leah Day, and welcome to Quilt-A-Long number 16 on the Free Motion Quilting Project. This week we're going to learn a brand new design called Zippling. Basically, it is stippling, but with zigzaggy shapes. Instead of curves, we're going to stitch straight lines and sharp angles. And you may find this design works easier than regular stippling. So let's give it a try on the machine.
Let's get started with a quick review of sharp stippling, and this is the design that we worked on last week. And remember that this is just simple, smooth curves, the same soft angles as stippling, only with occasional sharp points. And those sharp points are really convenient because you can stop with the needle in the down position, reposition the quilt, rotate it, and then reposition your hands. Now let's start actual zippling. And this is all straight lines and sharp angles. But notice how it works almost the exact same way. Rather than wiggling a line over and down to create a point, I'm instead zigzagging a line over and down to make a point, and then coming back around. A good practice for this, I didn't stitch it this way, but a good practice for this, remember back to the stippling, the very simple U shapes. With sharp stippling, we had very simple wiggly V shapes. Well, with zippling, we would do very simple regular V shapes, just straight line up and down. And then you would just simply gradually make that more complex, gradually work to make that a slightly more interlocking design, slightly more complex where you couldn't tell that it was just rows of V's all put together. But it's really wherever you want to start with this. If you really like sharp stippling and you're very comfortable with that, go on ahead and try a more complex version of zippling. More than likely, it's going to feel quite natural for you, particularly if you've done a lot of stippling in the last couple of weeks, simply because they work almost exactly the same way. You can see how these designs are sisters to one another, simply because they work, with this leading line that interlocks, that works in a row from left to right and right to left. The only difference that we're making between these designs is simply the nature of the line itself, a zigzag versus a wiggle. Now I'm stitching on a cheater cloth quilt just so that you can see the difference of this design versus the sharp stippling, which is right above it. And you can kind of see the texture of the two. And I'm working a line, a row of this from left to right across this square, and the row is about 4 inches tall from the bottom of the row where my hands are to the top of the row where the sharp stippling is. And really, this is a very, very large scale. It's a very large scale. It's about 1 inch, at times even bigger than that. And notice how far apart my hands are. Of course, I didn't zoom the camera out quite far enough, but my hands are at least 6 inches apart in order to accommodate how much I'm moving that quilt, in order to accommodate how much I need it to move and shift around. Of course, no matter which way you stitch it, you're going to end up, having to come up to the edge of the quilt, the edge of your quilting space, in which case just try and fit in, come to a point, just like I'm showing right now, and wiggle your way back down in order to start your next row. You can see how I'm doing that. And with this particular cheater cloth, I did kind of cross those lines in order to more or less interlock it with the sharp stippling. And I hope you can see just the difference between those two textures. It's going to produce a different effect on your quilt, and it's something that you really want to look at and experiment with. I mean, the sharp stippling, I really like to use that over areas, for sky. If it was a landscape quilt, if it's a blue quilt, that could indicate water. If it's a red quilt, that could indicate flames. For zippling, it seems more masculine. At least that's my personal opinion of the design. And I think that this would be a wonderful choice for any quilt for a little boy or a man, simply because it's not going to push that line of girly, curvy, fluid shapes. It's going to be a lot more rigid and solid lines. Now let's take a look at zippling used in Batik Beauty, a quilt that I worked on a little bit last week. This is a UFO, and I'm filling about an 8-inch block. And as you can see, I'm working just simple row from left to right, and I'm coming up to the corner and working down. Of course, the piece of fabric that this is stitched over is quite busy, and it's difficult to see exactly how this design is taking shape over the surface. But this is an important point. If you're working on a quilt where the fabric is particularly busy, and then of course if you're also matching the thread color to that fabric, if I was say using an orange or a yellow thread, you're going to have a hard time seeing what you're doing. And this is something that you're just going to have to get to a point where you have memorized the design. You know, simple zig, zig. Here I'm going to stitch some straight lines. I'm going to come to a point. I'm going to come back down. Whatever pattern you get most comfortable with, you need to have that memorized to a point where you can stitch it and not really need to see it so much. You just know how it's going to fit together. You remember how you stitched that first line, how it's going to fit in with the line that you're stitching now. And with stippling, you can get a little closer with your lines of stitching simply because you're dealing with very smooth, soft curves. With zippling, it's a little trickier because, of course, straight lines and sharp angles are harder to fit together. They're harder to wiggle together and really fit seamlessly. So this is going to be something where, if anything, leave spaces that are more open rather than more closed up. And you can see how just simply working left to right and right to left, it might not be the most noticeable design on the surface, but it certainly does add a very nice texture to the quilt.
So that's it for this video. I really hope you'll get on your sewing machine and give Zippling a try. This is a very fun design, and personally I think this looks a little bit more masculine because of all those straight lines and sharp angles than the more flowing curvy lines of stippling or sharp stippling. But of course, that's really up to you to decide and play with on your own at home. Make sure to link up your progress from last week's sharp stippling and share any questions that you have about using that design in your quilts. Until next time, let's go quilt.
Looking for an easier way to baste your quilts? Learn more about Penmore's, an awesome pin anchor system that allows you to baste without safety pins. Check it out at daystyledesigns.com.